The Blue Jackets have some stud prospects. Josh Rosa was on the show today talking about who these stud prospects are. That's coming up for you today on Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Hayden Houshorn. With me is my co-host, Jay Foster. In a moment, we're here to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of your favorite team and ours, the Columbus Blue Jackets. But before we get started, we want to thank you so much for making this your first listen every day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, YouTube, and the SiriusXM app. Josh Rosa from Dobber Prospects was on our show today talking about the players of the future in the CBJ organization. We'll talk about the big name guys that you know and some of the ones that require the eye of an expert.
We've been doing a lot of talk about the NHL entry draft over the past couple of months because the Blue Jackets haven't really gone anywhere in that time, but there's a lot of exciting prospects already in the system. So I thought, hey, let's bring on an expert, someone who knows a lot about all the different prospects that the Blue Jackets have, because they have a ton of them. So we've got Josh Rosa, who does prospect work for Dobber Prospects. He is their CBJ guy. So we're going to have a chat about a couple of the more exciting NHL potential players that the Blue Jackets have. How's it going, Josh?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to just come on and chat a bit about one of the greatest farm systems in the league right now. The talent's overwhelming, and it's just going to get better, hopefully, in the coming week.
Yeah, we might be biased, but we're pretty big fans of this prospect pool. So let's start off with a guy that I'm a big fan of. Jordan Dumais somehow fell all the way to the third round, and then went out and led the QMJHL in scoring this season. What do you like the most about Jordan Dumais? Do you think there's any red flags in his game that kind of are going to stop him from being an NHL player?
Well, there's two numbers that really forced him down into the third round, which is 5 and 9, which is his height, 5'9". I am a amateur scout, so I am like contractually obligated to like short skilled players like Jordan Dumais. It's what's really going to bring him over the edge is his hockey sense and skill. Like, he's not preying on the weak defenses in the Q, which, to be fair, the QMJHL is probably one of, if not the worst defensive prospect leagues in the whole world. Like, you have to take the numbers with a pinch of salt in there because they're just inflated compared to places like the OHL or the WHL, which has a lot better defensive structures. But his vision and knowledge is almost unpassed in the queue right now. Like, it's hard to see him proving anything more when down there. Unfortunately, with the whole NHL CHL agreement, it's either going to be NHL or bust for him, which I think he gets a shot, at least like maybe the first 9 games before burning the year of the contract, and see how it goes from there. But I also think it depends on who the coach ends up being. If it's 100% who we think it is, then he might have a harder time getting a roster spot. But I think he's worth at least giving the shot for the time being and seeing how he performs those first couple of games.
Yeah, so the Blue Jackets obviously have a huge stake right now in the QMJHL. And you just mentioned there that the defensive structure is not as good. But like how exactly, like how different is the QMJHL compared to the OHL and the WHL, which are the 3 main leagues that, you know, out of Canada is where the NHL is pulling prospects from? How far down is the QMJHL would you actually say is compared to those other two leagues in terms of the defense? Is it that far to the point where you're like, I can't really consider it, or is it still pretty comparative?
It's more of a spectrum. Like, you can't just completely write off the points, especially because he finished with 140 points this year in the Q, which is, I think, 2 or 3 behind Bedard in the WHL this year. And it is the best year since, I think, Radulov and Crosby at the early 2000s. He's tapped everyone since then. It's just like a spectrum. They just don't focus too much on defensive systems, and there's a lot of... It's like, I haven't been following it too long to know exactly why, but it's just been a feature and staple of this league that it's just not defensive focused. As I've understood it and experienced since I've started looking at things like this, is that the WHL has the best defensive structures and defensive teams in the entire CHL. OHL's in the middle and the Q is below. I wouldn't say it's like something that you could totally discount, but obviously with scouting, it's way more important to actually see the games than just to look at the numbers, because Dumay he's forward, not for center driven. He likes to play in the middle of the ice, which is more important than someone that gets those 140 points but plays along the half boards. Like, that doesn't work out as well up in the NHL. You really want those center driven guys like Dumay. So that's more of the important part, and seeing how he plays. Like, he exploits the defense using his mind and his shiftiness rather than preying on smaller guys or weaker defensive groups. It's all about how he plays, and he's got the skill and the shiftiness and the intelligence to make an impact. I don't know if it's going to be this year. Like, it's a little bit early, but he's kind of in the middle, which I would think would be great for him to spend some time in the AHL. But unfortunately, that's just not an option because of his age, which, what are you going to do?
Yeah, the CHL agreement is, like, I get it, but it's so frustrating seeing all of these players. Like, and I think we're going to see it with Shane Wright next year.
Yep.
If he's just finished playing in the AHL playoffs and he didn't look out of place there, but he's going to be either in the NHL or he's going to be back in the OHL. And is he ready for the NHL? Maybe not. Is he too good for the OHL? Yeah, definitely. So
yes,
it's really tough.
We're going to get back talking with Josh Rosa in a moment. But before we do, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about Gametime. Have you ever been stressed out about buying tickets, whether it's you and your date going to a ball game, whether it's you and some friends going to a concert, whatever it is? Don't use the app that you've been using. Throw it away. Get Gametime. Gametime is a great place to buy tickets to events that you really shouldn't be stressful buying tickets to. Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater shows near you, with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guaranteed. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. It shouldn't be a stressful thing buying tickets to go see your favorite team play. It should be fun. It should be exciting. You should get on the Gametime app and see prices for tickets that you love. And that is 100% guaranteed with Gametime. You will get great prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account with LOCKEDONNHL, $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
But in terms of Dumay, you said that you talked about how he's probably not going to be NHL this year. How long do you think that journey is for him before he kind of becomes that player? Do you think he is a guy that probably plays all 4 years in the Q and then goes to the A and then makes the jump, or does it kind of really depend on? Well, it probably depends on a bunch of different things, but what do you think his path is going to look like?
I think that there's a lot's going to focus on this training camp and how everything develops there, how the coach is going to use him in this year, because I don't think it's impossible for him to stick around in the NHL this year in a very sheltered kind of bottom six role, playing with some really safe guys, getting some easy minutes, like 10 to 15 minutes a night, but knowing his role. It depends on how the team wants to use him and how he develops. Like, you'd want to see a lot better skating from him. He's not the best skater, and it's something that he has improved on from last year to this year. So that's a positive. And so we're looking for that progression. If he can progress as a skater, add some strength and size to his frame, that it could be like if he comes in hot this training camp, he could possibly stick around, but I would look to him next year being a staple guy in at least the middle six in Columbus as the best case scenario. Worst case, takes another few years for him to get there, but I think it's hard because like he's got nothing more to prove in the juniors. Like, he's the top guy in the Q. He won the John Beliveau trophy for being the best regular season player. So I think he could stick around in a minor role, but next year I'd really like him to take a big step up to a middle six guy in the NHL. And I think he could do it if he keeps improving the way that he's been improving since last year to this year. I think it's definitely possible.
Another guy that Jackets fans have been looking at is James Malatesta, who was drafted in the 5th round in 2021. So certainly not a guy that Jackets fans had high expectations for. But he was over a point a game last year in the Q, and he was part of the Quebec Ramparts who went and won the Memorial Cup. So clearly there's something with this guy. He has a left wing shot. He plays on the right wing. How impressed were you by James Malatesta this year at 20 years old? I mean, he did some stuff.
Yeah, he's a real dog, and especially when the games get tough in the playoffs, he absolutely shines. That's where he first got noticed up, even in the league lower, but beyond the Q. And he just steps it up in the playoffs, and he's going to be a guy that's going to be a playoff performer wherever he goes. When the game steps up, he steps up with it. He's a small guy, but he doesn't play it. He drives hard to the net. He's a physical guy. He plays dirty. He's great. I think he's fantastic. AHL is the best place for him at this point because he really needs to make sure he's got his head on straight when he's facing 6+ feet guys, 200-pound defenders that are going to knock him down and really give him the ringer when he's playing physically like that. So I think having a year or two in the AHL at least will give him that physicality and strength, but I can really see him blossoming into a checking bottom six role in the NHL in the future, just because he's got that compete. He's got a scoring touch. He did miss some time with injury this year, and his numbers could have been even better, but especially when the games really start to matter at the end of the year in the playoffs, he is going to be the guy that you want on your roster when that comes down to it. He's just a fantastic guy to watch. He competes like anyone else. He can skate. He's great. There are those, like, I don't know how well his scoring is going to translate. His shot isn't the strongest or hardest, but I think he's got enough compete and drive that he's going to make a bottom six impact in the NHL someday.
Yeah, I'm a huge James Malatesta fan. So is Hayden as well. He's just a really fun player. That, like you said, 5th round. If you get an NHL player at all out of him, then that feels like a win. But what should we? I believe he turned 20 sometime last season, so he's ineligible to go back to the Q. So he's probably going to be either NHL or AHL this season. What should we expect from Malatesta in terms of like what's the best case scenario for this guy in the upcoming season?
Best case scenario is that he can make the jump to the NHL right away. He's going from playing teenagers and young adults to full-grown men, and it's going to be how can he handle the physical pressures that are going to be put on him. How is he going to handle the larger defenders, more physically mature players that he's going to play against? I do think that it would be best for him to get to the AHL, like keep him around preseason, training camp, get him into the pro and the NHL level, get him to follow around some of the smaller guys, some of the like Johnny Gaudreau's there, learn the game, and then get sent down to just get his feet under him in the AHL. He's a guy that I think you could bring up this year if injuries get going on the team. Bottom six, you could plug him in. I think he'd be great for a handful of games, going there 10, 20 games around. But I do think keeping him down for at least a year and a year, 2 years would be probably ideal for him.
Another guy that the Jackets Jackets fans are totally excited about is their first-round draft pick in 2022. The 6th overall draft pick at defense, David Jiricek, who had his first season with the Monsters this past year, had 38 points in 55 games. Pretty impressive for a 19-year-old. And a lot of Jackets fans are counting on him being a regular in the lineup this upcoming year. Is David Jiricek, is he ready for the NHL after what he did with the Monsters?
I think so. I can see him coming right into the top 4. I'm not sure how exactly it's gonna all pan out with all the new signings and the trade for Provorov, how all the pairings and everything is going to come out, but I think he can start at least on the second pairing and just eat minutes. I think he could kind of sort of do a similar thing to what Caden Gooley did with Montreal this year, where he's a young player, but he is so composed. He's so good in his own zone. He's so smart, physically ready. Like, there's a lot of places that when doing a redraft, he's going 1 or 2 overall of last year compared to like leapfrogging guys like Nemec and Slavkovsky, which it's too early to say for sure, but I do agree that he's kind of raised the bar, and I think he's going to be a 82 game player next year. He's going to eat minutes. I think he can possibly be about the same points as he got in the AHL. I mean, I'm an optimistic guy, but at heart, so I think like 20 to 30 assists and maybe like 5 goals is probably a pretty realistic, safe bet for him. Like, he's just so mature in his game and ready to go. I just think he's ready to make that jump, and he's going to impress a lot of people that didn't watch his AHL, and he's going to kind of take the league by storm, hopefully, best case scenario. I don't see him going back to the AHL next year. I think he's going to be an NHL regular. He's just that good.
Yeah, when I did my draft stuff last year, he was the second. He was my second ranked player behind Shane Wright last year, and I still stand by that. I think Logan Cooley has kind of closed the gap a little bit, but I'm a huge fan of Jiricek's game. What do you think in terms of, so you mentioned him probably starting on the second pairing. Do you think there's a world in which the Blue Jackets have as their top pairing next season, Zach Werenski and David Jiricek? How do you think that's going to shake out?
I think it's really possible. Werenski's a good guy to learn from on the ice. Like, he's a top defender in the league in kind of all three zones, and he's responsible enough to let it to kind of clean up some of the issues that Jiricek would have in his own zone, or if he makes an unfortunate pinch, that Werenski's going to be there enough to mitigate some of the errors that will happen with a young player. And just getting minutes would be fantastic. I think it does depend on how the season kind of shapes out. If the Blue Jackets are serious about really contending and putting the pressure on to win a whole bunch of games and make the playoffs, then I would think I would want him more on a second line, trying to keep him away from the top end talent, trying to shelter him a little bit while still getting him those 20-minute games that he could play. But at least at the start, if he has a strong training camp, he could very easily, I could see him working on the top line. If him and Werenski hit it off and he really hits his stride early in the season, he could get away with being the first pairing this year.
That would confirm a lot of things that Jackets fans have thought about him over the last year, which is that he is going to be a guy kind of full-time in the lineup. Like, people are kind of banking on that. And yeah, I mean, sure, it's optimistic to think that he can do in the NHL what he did in the AHL, but Jackets fans are kind of counting on that, and I think so is the front office. But just to move on here, a guy that I want to talk about is Josh Dunne, who is a kind of an under the radar guy. He sticks out to Jackets fans because he's 6'4", and he had 37 points in 60 games in the AHL this past year. Had 20 goals with the Monsters, so he was doing something in Cleveland. I mean, 20 goals, that's, a goal every 3 games. That's a big deal. But when he came up to Columbus, no points in 8 games that he played. He had 10 penalty minutes in his 8 games. Sure, do Jackets fans love the idea of a 6'4" center being right there, ready to go? He's 24. He's kind of like, in their eyes, maybe the next Pierre-Luc Dubois. But the penalty minutes is kind of tough. But what have you kind of seen from Josh Dunne, if anything, that either gets you excited or maybe gets you a little concerned about him getting more time in the Union Blue?
It's tough to say because obviously there's going to be a big shake-up at center at some point this year. That's Jarmo Kekalainen's come out and said this has to change. Something's got to give. And I think the 3rd overall pick this year is going to really help with that, depending on which way they go. But I do have a feeling that they're going to pick a high-end center that's going to help with that. The size is really, like, it's mouth-watering. Like, you always really want those tall guys, long reach. I just don't know if I've seen a lot of those tall guys, tall centers that just don't have the skating ability or the scoring touch to make the jump. And I think he's better than his NHL stats have given out for sure. Like, no one looked good last year on Columbus. Like, you can't say that he had no points and penalty minutes because he was playing on a terrible team. But I think that his ceiling is like a good 4th line shutdown guy. You put him out, plays reliable minutes, wins a face-off, plays solidly enough in his own zone, uses his size. I don't think that there's too much more than that.
Which I will take.
Yeah,
I think as a Jackets fan, I love a good face-off win every now and then. If someone can just come in and win a face-off every now and then, I'll take that.
Yeah, it's. I think we're going to talk about another really good face-off man in a minute too, but yeah, like fringe NHL player is still like one of the best hockey players in the world. Like the guy could still play hockey, and especially as just a kind of second option if someone gets hurt or something happens, you could do a whole lot worse than Josh Dunne plugging in on the bottom six there. Like he's not a black hole of play like some other guys, but I just don't think that he's, especially if you want to build a really good, strong center line, I think he's going to be more of the 13th guy than a regular if you're looking at contending for playoffs there. Yeah. Which, yeah, if you know your role, if you need people like that sometimes. You need to fill roles and fill in holes. So he works for that, I think. He's someone just to keep an eye on when he comes in and look out for that big 6'4" wingspan there.
I feel like I always think about Scott Harrington as the perfect like seventh defenseman of probably wasn't good enough to be an NHL regular, but survived. You know, he wasn't a complete black hole. And so I think that's something that the Blue Jackets missed this year, was they didn't really have that seventh defense guy. And I know that, you know, everyone was injured, literally everyone was injured. But I think it's a really underrated thing to have like that one guy that is your 13th forward that you can just throw in the press box. And if you need him to, he can run down the stairs and get his gear on, you know, like that. I want to talk about another guy who I think probably has a higher ceiling and who is my personal favorite Cleveland Monster, and I think is a lot of people's favorite Cleveland Monsters. Trey Fix Wolansky had a monster season with the Monsters this year, if you'll excuse the accidental pun.
Oh, that was great.
Accident.
I said it and then was like, you know what, we're just going to roll with it.
I want them all to have monster seasons.
Is he going to be an NHLer this year? Do you think he's ready to make that jump to be an NHLer full time?
I think he's, especially with that year, earned at least a shot. Especially with the way that some players performed last year, even without the injuries. Like there were some big disappointments. Names like Sillinger come to mind with that. I think he's at least earned the opportunity to play his way onto the roster, and even that could help guys that are on the roster try and light a fire under them, like saying, like, if you're not picking it up, we have this guy that did 71 points at 61 games in the NHL, in the AHL last year, biting on your heels to make something of it. And I think he's at least good enough to stick around. Again, this is going to be a really big off-season of change for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Like, they've made it obvious that there's going to be a lot of movement. So depending on where everything shakes out, because there are defenders that I think could have been on the team a month ago, but now have been pushed out because of certain players coming in and moving out, kind of thing. I'd like to see him get an extended visit. Like, he's only played 15 NHL games over 2 seasons. I think at this point he's earned a full look to see if he can keep up with the pace of the NHL, and like, all signs point to that he can at least be a decent contributor on the back end. Like, I don't think he's going to put up point per game totals in the NHL, especially right out the gate. But as a guy that could come in and score like 10, 15 goals, put up 30 points, I think that's possible for him this year, and even higher if everything works out, depending on who he plays with and how he plays. I think the NHL is a real possibility for him this year.
I think we'd all love to see it. I mean, the Blue Jackets have just been a team that has just been relying so heavily on these prospects, relying so heavily on these young guys. And so many of them have came up, worn a Blue Jackets jersey, and just not done squat. So of all these guys, of all these prospects that we've mentioned either today or maybe some guys that we haven't mentioned, who is the guy for you, Josh, that gets you the most excited about, as in like you see him and you're like, yeah, he's a guy?
Well, David Jiricek is definitely, like, it's hard to even almost call him a prospect because I am expecting really big things from him in the NHL this year. Like, he feels pro ready. Another guy that I think with the right growth could be a very good middle six forward option is someone that we've talked about off the show, Luca Del Bel Belluz from he used to play for the Steelheads, but I think he got traded to the Sting, I think, this year.
Yes.
He's a big guy. He's 6 foot, but he's really lean. He's
handsome fella too.
Yeah, yeah, he looks good. That's another plus.
Huge
he weighs
plus.
about the same as Jordan Dumais, but Jordan Dumais is 5'9" and he's 6 foot. So he really needs to really add strength, and I think I'd like to see him add a physical part of his game, but he's a very good face-off man. He's got good hands. He's surprisingly shifty at points and can skate. He's a good two-way defender. He can play in his own zone, play in forward, and I believe he's turning 20 this year? Can't remember his age, because I think he might be making the jump up to Cleveland this year. And if he can really,
he'll be 20 in November. So there you go. Yep, you got it.
Yeah, perfect. If he can get up to Cleveland with the professional training staff and everything, really put on some weight and muscle onto his body, add that physical part of the game, like he's pretty good with the puck on his stick and fighting off defenders, but in the defensive zone he's quite passive for someone his size. Then I would rather him be a little bit more active and physical. But if he adds that part of the game, he could jump up to kind of a second line, third line center of the future for Columbus, which is very exciting. Like, he's got the frame, he's got the skill for it. I just think more growth, really fill out physically, and then he could be a really solid add to the middle of the lineup and the middle center roster, which is something that Columbus really wants and needs, obviously, at this point.
We do have 2.5 centers, yeah.
Yeah. But he's someone to definitely just watch his trajectory. Like, he's, I think, projecting up. He's going to be one to watch for sure, and hopefully I'm not expecting him anywhere close to the NHL this year or maybe even next year, but come maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, then I think we could see him coming up to the NHL and playing some meaningful two-way minutes, chipping in some points and feeding some good wingers if he's got some at that point. So he's definitely one that's interesting and one to look for that we haven't mentioned so far.
Yeah. Putting him and James Malatesta on a line with the Monsters this season sounds like a real good time to me.
A lot of fun, yeah, for sure. Skill and speed.
Yeah. If people want to learn more about Blue Jackets prospects, if they want to read some of your work that you do over at Dobber Prospect, where can people find you and your work online?
Yeah, so I'm mostly on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Rosa Other, as in a Rosa by any other name, but that was way too long of a name and reference for Twitter. So it's Rosa Other, and I update as much as I can on Dobber prospects on the Blue Jackets page. Obviously, with the draft coming up in one more week, we're going to be a whole lot more busy. We're going to have the 31 and 31, a big update on all the draft picks that Columbus is going to have. Yeah, that's the main spots right now, Dobber prospects and Twitter.
That's all we have for you today. Tomorrow we'll be doing a season review for our guys Carson Meyer and Mikhail Poutier. Thank you so much for listening, for making us your first listen every day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, YouTube, and the SiriusXM app. I'm your host, Hayden Heilshorn. For my co-host, Jay Foster, we want to again thank you so much for listening. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.